Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining us for the first time, we appreciate your time. In this episode, I want to dive into a very important development that has taken place in the United States of America and why the continent of Africa should pay close attention with regards to the new US Secretary of State, someone I consider to have zero international experience, zero diplomatic engagement, lack of strategic engagement, and no clue on how global conflicts are formed. And he frequently mixes internal politics and global diplomacy.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us this morning. Congratulations on unanimous confirmation by the Senate. That's rare these days. Let's begin with January 6 pardons. Back when this happened, you called it a national embarrassment, saying we now have third world countries that are lecturing us and we have tin pot dictators that are mocking us. Of course, you're now America's top diplomat. You'll be speaking with your counterparts around the world. What message does that pardon send to them?
Well, I don't anticipate a single one of our partners will ask about it, obviously, and you know this well from your time in the administration. And my job is to focus on the foreign policy of the United States. I have a different job this morning and a different focus, and it's one that demands 100% of our attention. And so that's what I'll be focused on, and won't be opining on domestic matters at this point because, frankly, my focus needs to be 100% on how I interact with our counterparts, our adversaries, our potential enemies around the world to keep this country safe, to make it prosperous. That's the clear mandate from the president. It's what he campaigned on. I think he made it pretty clear yesterday that he wants to reinvigorate an American foreign policy that makes America safer and stronger and more prosperous. That's what the promise that Donald Trump was elected to keep, and that's the one we're going to help him keep at the Department of State.
But as a senator, you did say that it affected our standing in the world. You don't believe that anymore?
Well, as a senator, I had an opinion on all kinds of domestic matters, but now I'm focused singularly on foreign policy, on how I interact with our allies. For example, my first meeting right out of the box as soon as I'm sworn in and get over to the State Department is with the members of the so-called Quad, which are our important allies in Australia and in Japan and India. And we'll be talking to them and we'll be focused on that. None of these domestic topics are going to come up. They're going to be focused on how do we make our relationship one that increases and strengthens not just our position in the world, but, for example, freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific. And those are the kinds of things that we're going to be focused on 100%. And that's the things I'll be talking about.
Folks, I will break this into different parts. But first, let's look at the challenges that are facing the world. Because at this critical time in Africa's history, with a huge shift in the geopolitical environment, we need a steady hand with regards to how Africa can continue to walk to victory in a number of areas. But let me step back a little bit. First, Marco Rubio. Experts will argue he's got some experience. Well, I think the experience he's got in Foreign Relations Committee, asking questions to lawmakers, talking to diplomats, questioning intelligence report, figuring out what's going on around the world regards to US's position. But that's completely different to actually shuttle to a destination of where the events are taking place. Marco Rubio has no clue regards to the current events around the world. Draw back to different global challenges. For example, in Europe, you have the Russian-Ukraine war. In China, you do have the current challenges going on between the Taiwan and the country of China. You do have other very important things like what's happening in Gaza and Israel. And you have these Latin American challenges that are at the moment. You have very important global issues that are going on right now. The world does not actually need an on-the-job training with regards to Secretary of State. But where does it get spicy? The continent of Africa must pay attention because these are strategic times for the continent. We have the Sudan issue going on at the moment. South Africa has come under enormous threat from the United States of America. We have the Congo crisis, Rwanda and the DR Congo. We do have the Sahel at the moment, which is boiling. We have the Russians in the continent, the Chinese in the continent, the European Union in the continent. And Marco Rubio thinks that the America's foreign policy will be based on U.S. interest. I find that laughable. that the United States foreign policy will be based on U.S. interests, I think he fails to understand how the world has changed in the past 4 years. Let me say this. According to Marco Rubio, the greatest challenge facing the world today is not climate change, not pandemic, not poverty, not difficulties. He said it is China. This goes a long way to inform, again, like I've always said, that U.S. foreign policy is not changing. It's informed as a result of its geopolitical foes. Let me show you this piece, according to what Marco Rubio said.
When everything is a priority, nothing's a priority. And Senator Rubio, your top priority must be the People's Republic of China. Since the election in November, so this is all within the last 2 months, the PRC has hacked our Treasury Department, including CFIUS. Continuo has been described as the worst telecom hack in U.S. history. Sabotaged important undersea communication cables in Asia and Europe. Deployed ships to the South China Sea to harass our allies like the Philippines in their own territorial waters. Simulated a naval blockade of the Japanese islands for the first time. Conducted the largest naval drills in decades targeting Taiwan and the broader Western Pacific. Revealed new mobile piers suitable for a Taiwan invasion, unveiled advanced aircraft, and launched the world's largest amphibious warship, and they've allowed Iran to draw down and ship nearly 3 million barrels of oil from a storage site in China. It's obvious that Xi Jinping is positioning his chess pieces in preparation for war. He's directed his military to be prepared to take Taiwan by 2027, and folks, that's only 2 years away. Now, it's true that does not mean that he will invade in 2027, and it's also true that it's not predetermined. But it should be very concerning to all of us that he's given his military that direction. Because time and time again, dictators tell people what they're going to do, and then they go out and try and do it. The only thing that dictators respond to is force, strength, peace through strength. This was something Ronald Reagan understood a long time ago, and it's what we have to get back to in the United States. Xi Jinping is vowed to be the world-dominating power by 2049. We should take him at his word. That's what he believes he is going to try and do. It's time for us to go on the offensive and abandon illusions about what kind of adversary we're faced. This is not a managed competition. This is a competition we must win. It will take more than an all-of-government approach. It'll take an all-of-society approach to be able to win this. As our lead diplomat, Senator Rubio, you are in a position to set the tone. And that's why I can't think of a better pick to be the Secretary of State than you. So, first of all, do you agree that the PRC is the biggest threat that we face as the United States?
The Communist Party of China that leads the PRC, is the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. They have elements that the Soviet Union never possessed. They are a technological adversary and competitor, an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor now, in every realm. It's an extraordinary challenge. It's one that I believe will define the 21st century. When they write the book about the 21st century, there's going to be some chapters in there about Putin, there's going to be some chapters in there about some of these other places, but the bulk of that book about the 21st century will be not just about China, but about the relationship between China and the United States and what direction it went. And I think you're alluding to it in your statement. I know you may have another question. I don't want to eat up all your time, but I do want to say this. The Chinese believe that the United States are a great power in inevitable decline and that they are an inevitable rise. Now, they already are. They're going to be a rich and powerful country, and we're going to have to deal with them. The danger is that because of our own actions, in many cases, a dangerous imbalance is built up in that relationship. We allowed them for years to pretend that they were some developing countries, so we should allow them to continue to cheat on trade and commerce. We should allow them to continue to expand. They lied about not militarizing and populating island chains in the South China Sea and the like. We allowed them for years before we got serious about it to conduct grotesque human rights violations against Uyghur Muslims, as an example. One of the most horrifying things happening on the planet. And for years, no one talked about it, which, by the way, not just has a human rights component to it, it allows them to use slave labor to produce goods that, at the expense of the rest of the world. Talk about not just a horrific humanitarian crisis, but an unfair trade practice as well. We've allowed them to get away with things. And frankly, the Chinese did what
any country in the world would do given these opportunities. They took advantage of it. And so I think now we're dealing with the ramifications of it. I agree 100% what you said, but I remind you, and I remind everyone, I guess I want to make this point, that much of what we need to do to confront China is here at home. It's not just abroad, it's also here at home. We have to rebuild our domestic industrial capacity, and we have to make sure that the United States is not reliant on any single other nation for any of our critical supply chains.
And with 4 seconds left, how are you going to explain that to your average American, that we need this all-sized society approach? And to your point exactly, that it needs to begin here at home, and so that people from my state, Nebraska, will understand and get on board.
If we stay on the road we're on right now, in less than 10 years, virtually everything that matters to us in life will depend on whether China will allow us to have it or not. Everything from the blood pressure medicine we take to what movies we get to watch, and everything in between, we will depend on China for it. They have come to dominate the critical mineral industry supplies throughout the world. Everywhere in the world, they've now established critical mineral rights. Even those who want to see more electric cars, no matter where you make them, those batteries are almost entirely dependent on the ability of the Chinese and the willingness of the Chinese Communist Party to produce it and export it to you. So if we don't change course, we are going to live in a world where much of what matters to us on a daily basis, from our security to our health, will be dependent on whether the Chinese allow us to have it or not. That's an unacceptable outcome.
Marco Rubio is so antagonist towards China that China has sanctioned Marco Rubio 2 times. Speaking at the Heritage Foundation in 2022, Rubio said, "The gravest threat facing America today, it is the challenge that will define not just this country, but my generation and every generation represented in this room today," according to him. That challenge is not climate change, it is not the pandemic, it's not the left's version of social justice. The threat Marco Rubio is referring to is that will define this century is China. Yes, that's how Marco Rubio perceived the world. To mean that the greatest change or challenge facing the world today is China. With such a mindset coming into taking the top diplomatic position, I think it's a cause for concern for the continent. Considering Marco Rubio's position, Marco Rubio has no clue with regards to foreign policy in terms of experience in the continent of Africa. He was one of those individuals who pushed for South Africa to be sanctioned because South Africa made a non-aligned movement with regards to the war in Ukraine. The grave misunderstanding with regards to internal issues and global conflict will be the first concern that Africa should pay attention. Marco Rubio was blasted by the former presidential candidate, Bush, who actually told Marco Rubio that he lacks international travel. He got no experience globally. So I wonder how he's going to deal with all of this issue. He is going to be a total hawkish international diplomat that would not sit well with a number of countries around the world. This is how the BBC described who Marco Rubio is. According to the BBC, Marco Rubio is considered to be a foreign policy hawk, meaning someone who takes hardline position in the case towards countries like China, Russia, other global strategic partners, South Africa, and the rest. This is a big concern with regards to how Africa should perceive the new United States of America's Secretary of State. There are other very experienced diplomats who are in line with regards to who have African experience, like Thibon Nagy, Peter Pan, who have engaged the continent of Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, and they understand the issues. Marco Rubio is someone whom I think he wants to operate from the first speech he gave. He talked about the United States engaging foreign policy from the US's interest. I think what I interpret into this is that if Marco Rubio, according to United States interest, that there should be a democratic government in Niger, Marco Rubio don't care what with the historical fundamentals with regards to what happened, what transpired, what Niger has been going through. If he knows that it's of the United States' interest for them to be a democratic government in Niger or any of those countries, so be it. By lacking that international exposure and understanding history, there will be clashes in a number of areas. South Africa, for example, is one of those countries that would definitely clash with the new US administration in a number of areas. South Africa's position with regards to the war in Ukraine, it's been something which I think people like Marco Rubio will find it difficult to engage the continent of Africa, because they fail to understand the historical relationship that South Africa does have with the country of Russia. I think Marco Rubio will need a lot of coaching in regards to the current role, because I'm not sure if he has a better understanding with regards to the current trends that are going on around the world at the moment. Marco Rubio is so fixated with the US perspective that I think he's going to find it tough to engage other strategic partners around the world. It is important to note that African governments should pay attention on what's going on in Washington, on what's happening across the geopolitical partners' environment, because these are essential issues. But if you look at Marco Rubio's background, there's nothing that tells you. I don't want to go with regards to Cuba, his stand on that aspect. I don't want to go on regards to his stand on devastating comments he made with the ongoing Gaza and Israeli war. I don't want to talk about that area because he made terrible comments with regards to that. This is a foreign policy novice that will have the chance to learn on the job. But I think the world is at a critical moment that the United States of America putting in someone who needs to learn the ropes. It will take time. And I consider this to be an opportunity for the continent of Africa to continue to work and make the strategic choices to engage its partners. Marco Rubio will not change anything anytime soon. He has enough time to learn, but I think before he learns all of these to understand the world beyond the United States circles, then he begins to understand that, well, let me say this. Marco Rubio would have to learn that being a senator and a US top diplomat are two separate things, because the challenge is seeing the United States America's interests from the global lens is going to be a fundamental blunder. The United States of America's Secretary of State position is the second toppest role, the second highest position in the US government. I mean, after the president, you have the vice president, then you have the Secretary of State. This is to tell you how very important this position is. I want to thank you for watching. Let me know what you think with regards to the current United States of America's Secretary of State, what you think he brings on the table, the hawkish behavior and the perspective around the world, how he sees the world from the US own lens. That will change because Africa, for example, have decided to make strategic choices that are of its interest, and they're not going to listen to anyone, people like Marco Rubio.